This is a special edition of the GuestX podcast, coming to you from Fort Lauderdale, Florida at the Phocuswright Conference 2021, where we'll be speaking to the leading hospitality executives to understand how they're building guest experience worth talking about.
Getting towards the end of day 3 of what is, I think, the biggest travel conference in the U.S., maybe in the world, the Phocuswright Summit, although they do it all over the world. But great time here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We've got a guest with us. Her and I were spending a lot of time talking about tours and attractions and experiences. It's a company called BeMyGuest, and Blanca is with us. And Blanca, for our listeners, obviously BeMyGuest is not going to be a brand that they've really heard of. You're primarily focused in the Asian market. But give us a little history, just kind of about the company, how it started, and kind of where it is today.
Sure. I mean, BeMyGuest is a B2B travel technology company focusing on servicing the tours, activities, and attraction space, predominantly in APAC. We were founded in 2012, so we're about to turn 10 years old, and you're right, nobody would have heard about us in US, and actually we like to keep it that way in APAC as well. We're very happy to be behind the scenes powering the supply for online travel agents, marketplaces, super apps. So we basically service brands like Traveloka in Indonesia, which is the number one OTA locally in that market. Others like My Real Trip in Korea, AirAsia, which is the largest low-cost carrier in Southeast Asia based out of Malaysia. Recently, we signed a deal with Singapore Airlines. But in general, because we're B2B and we're kind of doing all the back-end work.
The dirty work.
The dirty work, all the pipelines, we're not a sexy company. So yeah, we're okay that you don't know about us.
No, well said. Like a really successful B2B company. I mean, so it sounds, understanding the complexities of tours and attractions. If I understand it correctly, you've taken probably a lot of the most popular tours and attractions and kind of made them bookable through APIs, where before they were inaccessible to a lot of these B2C companies.
Yeah, correct. I mean, just to give you an example, only 6-7 years ago, we were literally queuing at the Universal Studios Singapore queue, the travel agent queue, to buy paper tickets. And I would do that, and then they'll take them 2-3 hours to print thousands of tickets for us, and I'll just wait until they deliver to me. And I would take the first serial number and the last serial number, because they were printed in sequence, and I'll text them or WhatsApp them to my tech team. They will load them into our system, and then we would be distributing them throughout China in minutes, right? So really, yes, that was the beginning of it, like digitizing just the basic ticketed items, mostly attractions and theme parks, and then eventually trying to help the activity operators of like your cooking class or your more bespoke experience. And now we're focusing a little bit more on day tours because they have elements of the checkout process, like pickup location, you need to digitize, so that's where we are now. But yeah, basically trying to get the suppliers get online, which is an extremely difficult process. All of these operators are literally, they were running the business of pen and paper, especially the medium-sized, the smaller ones, and they still are. So,
And you think that's a cultural thing, or is that just ingrained in them? Is that something that you see over time is going to change?
I mean, this is not a new sector. It's a very old sector of the tourism industry. It's just coming online last. So it's usually referred to as the final frontier in travel distribution. And that's because hotels were digitized first, flights as well, then local accommodation, and the ugly duckling has been experiences and things to do, which is really funny because when you travel, that's the first thing that you think about, but not the first thing that you book. It's actually the last thing that you book when you're preparing or planning your trip. So you first book usually your flight, then your hotel, and then you're in destination, you think about what you're going to do. Usually just go down to the concierge and then they tell you the 10 things that they usually resell over and over. But it's usually within the 3-day period, a 3-day kind of time frame window in destination. So it has been left in terms of the digitization wave, but now there's a lot of investment that has been going through. I mean, you hear a lot about new reservation systems, new OTAs, and new products. I think it started really what kind of like highlighted the sector was the acquisition of Viator by TripAdvisor. Um, so it's about 7 years that digitization has been ongoing. So it's very early, and it's a very difficult sector to digitize because it's extremely fragmented. I mean, when you sell a hotel, you sell a standard room of maybe like a deluxe room, and then you have your suites. And when you sell an airline, you have an economy seat, premium economy, and then you have your business class. But they're very standard. When you sell attractions and experiences, you could be selling a Formula One ticket entry versus a diving course, or a day tour around the city with a Chinese tour guide. So digitizing that, it's the variety and fragmentation it has made it so difficult.
It is so complicated.
It's incredibly complicated.
And it's not just because they're digitizing that experience, but they've got to translate that experience into an experience. So you have a level of service that you're trying to sell and get the consumer to adopt, and then basically say, this is a good service, and you guys are trying to do all of that process. But it's a similar process that you guys are going through with Exploria as well, because you've got the leisure markets. So we're taking the Asian market, we're saying it's complicated over there, and the assumption is we've managed to do that here in the US. But you're actually running into the very similar
Yes, I think Blanca was hoping that maybe the U.S. had made some strides where maybe in her markets they haven't. And after listening to her, I feel like we're maybe even further behind. But a lot of the same experiences, down to regulations. In the U.S., you've got boats go out. There's certain things with the U.S. Coast Guard you have to have. So you have to have a system that's built to be able to know exactly how many people are on that boat, and their safety precautions have to be taken. And so what we find is the reservation management systems get really fragmented and very specified for a certain type of attraction, like water rafting or those type of things. And then what happens is, so then you build to their APIs, and you find out that you're not capturing a large swath of activities. You're capturing a large swath of activity types. So it has been very difficult. It's like, Blanca, you don't have a reservation management system, right? So you do have one.
Yeah, we do. We had to roll out one in 2018.
I was going to say, because there's really no other way. I mean, if somebody doesn't have anything,
exactly.
You can't build an API to paper.
Exactly. We started with our own extranet, and basically, first we tried, okay, let's get the operators to load their products and the pricing. That totally failed. They were not, they wouldn't do it unless you had significant volume of sales. And then till up until today, we actually closed that extranet because the quality that comes through the operator, they're not that digitally savvy. But we started with an extranet, and then we took the management of the content, the pricing, for uploading the translation, because we're in Asia, so we actually translate product in about 7 languages. So we started that way, and then in that way you digitize products, you could sell it to the different online travel agents, marketplaces, super apps. That was great. But it came to a point where we ran out of inventory, because all of these online travel agents, they used to instant confirmation, ticketing, electronic ticketing for the flight sales or for hotels, right? So when we ran out of options, we thought, okay, we've been doing this for about 6-7 years now. We turn around, and where are the reservation systems at? Reservation systems, there's big brands in US, Europe, and Australia, but in the Southeast Asia region especially, we're based in Singapore, in that particular region, the adoption has been pretty much zero.
wow.
So we saw that sort of like we have to come up with something, right? So how do we enable more of the supply online? So we rolled out our booking system, which launched with an e-commerce module to encourage the operator to do the right data, because if they're loading it for their own website sales, then that means that it's more accurate, so they can resell it. And then we empower them with also a remote sales system that they can use for their own direct sales over the counter. And this year we're launching a corporate module so that they can also leverage the system to manage their own corporate sales with agents or maybe banks or whichever corporation they want to use. So yeah, we do have a booking system. It's the only way.
that alone is tough because now you're building a booking system for all of these different attractions and these different segments. And they all needed to do something a little bit different.
At 7 languages.
Right, it's 7 languages just because it wasn't originally hard enough.
Right.
Yeah, but I think in terms of types of, there is kind of, as you mentioned, different types of activities or things to do. And I think what you mentioned in terms of boats, that is so specific that we wouldn't really pretend that our ecosystem is important for our system is good for the medium-sized attraction, specifically, or the medium-sized activity operator. Not so much for day tours, and not so much for cruises or water-based activities. Actually, we have some water-based activities, but the simple ones like paddleboarding or kayaking. But you're right. I mean, there's the variety of things to do. You could probably, I mean, when we look at all of our categories, we have probably 50, right? In which you can actually slice and dice them, and the variables of each are so different.
Hats off to you. I just had a special appreciation for how difficult the problem is and you're trying to solve. And I think you guys have gone a lot further than really anyone I know in this space. I mean, there are groups dedicated to just the resolution business. You guys, it almost sounds like you kind of came at it the reverse, right? You came at it, you wanted to distribute, and then you realized, kind of like exploring, you start realizing, well, how do we distribute something I can't get? And you mentioned onboarding. We've looked at it. It's hard. I mean, they're just self-onboarding activities. The product that comes out has just consistently been inconsistent.
Well, it kind of goes across markets. So very similar to vacation rentals, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It
We
is.
have a tough time with inventory, classifying the inventory, loading it properly, marketing it properly, talking about it.
You need to be able to see it in real time. So okay, but look, there's a lot of money to be made if groups like Blanca's, BeMyGuest can be successful at doing this because tours and attractions, I don't know, last time I saw from Arrival, it had been like 2.2 billion or something. It's
Attractions, things like this is worth 50 billion globally.
150 billion, maybe 2.2.
40% in Asia, and Asia is leading ahead of Europe and US. So it's
volume of people.
It's huge.
But it's just massive. So anytime, I mean, we'll get there. It's it just, I think it does. It trails the other major segments. So tell us, Bonnie, as we kind of wrap up, obviously coming here to the Phocuswright Summit, what were some of your goals? What have you thought of the conference? Obviously, a little smaller than maybe in years past, as I think just opened up in Europe. A lot of people probably from Europe didn't feel comfortable booking their tickets, not knowing if they were going to be able to. What were some of your goals, and what are going to be some of your takeaways as you get ready to
Oh, well, I mean, for me, I've been locked in Singapore for the past 2 years. So the first objective was just to get out.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm just
Any
like,
invitation whatsoever.
invitation
Like, come out.
I'm like 24-hour flight. Yes, I'm on it. So that was first. And obviously seeing a lot of familiar faces because the online travel industry is so cool. Right? So once you spend 5-6 years in the industry, I've been there 10. So you get to know a lot of people, and it's just nice to see familiar faces. And also to kind of see post-pandemic, what has actually happened, because there's been a lot of shifts in the industry, right? So it's been quite interesting. Some players have gone, some got stronger. It's amazing what happened to all the local accommodation providers and vacation rentals. Those businesses, it's just like a rocket ship, and then all of us in the other verticals are like, oh my god, especially airlines. And in APAC, I mean, it's been especially difficult because we're just reopening. Right?
And it really started earlier.
It started much
It's
earlier.
finishing later. It started earlier.
Yeah, so it's been.
I think it's gone back and forth.
But what's really encouraging is to see how US in this case is dealing with the pandemic. there is a world where you can live with it, and I just hope that Asian countries take a look at what's going on outside of Asia, because literally all borders are still closed. I mean, there are some travel lanes that are opening now in Singapore, which is super encouraging to big markets like Indonesia, Korea. Australia is reopening, but it's still limited. So, for example, to access Singapore, to fly into Singapore, they have a limit right now. I think they just increased it. It used to be 3,000 people per day. So it's very low numbers, exactly. So, but we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. It's been the toughest 2 years. I think this type of devastation, whoever survives it, really knows what we're talking about. And what we do think is it's just gonna, the trend is just gonna all of a sudden jump in and see. There's a lot of traditional agents that will kind of miss it. So any company without technology is probably gonna struggle a lot, and those that have technology and that have invested in technology throughout this period, we're trying to monetize on that next year.
It's certainly what we saw in the US back was once the restrictions were left, it just takes off. And it's not, it doesn't come back exactly as it was. Business travel, urban markets, there are a number of areas that it's going to be a longer,
If ever.
right.
But they're adapting, right? So they're finding new verticals to go into. We had a couple of guests that talked about that as well. They were very specific in a vertical, and they're having to look inside to be able to survive. But that also means that there's a transformation in the industry.
Yes, and I think they're all looking for opportunities. Where are the gaps? What do we fill in? What are we well positioned to shift to? So, Blanca, thank you so much. I know it's the end of the show. It's always a long, 2 or 3 days with all the meetings and times that are we really appreciate you stopping by and talking to us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely.
Always happy to talk.
Pleasure.
Excellent.
Thank
you
you.
guys.